Welcome to the beautiful St. Louis Hotel on this warm, beautiful summer evening. Placemakers, some of you may have attended previous Placemaker sessions. This is the 5th installation for us. It is a public engagement exercise initiative that CMLC initiated about 2 years ago. And as I said, this is our 5th installation. The previous discussions, we covered a lot of topics. Actually, we covered everything from architecturally, how we're delivering East Village. We talked about adaptive reuse of buildings, historical assets like this. We also talked about placemaking from a programming perspective, and we did a session on public art. But tonight, our session is called At the Confluence of Two Rivers, Respecting Our History and Lands. And so when we were choosing the theme for tonight, actually, we wanted to explore a little bit about what it was to describe the lands of East Village at the confluence of the Bow and Elbow Rivers. And more importantly, we really wanted to examine how First Nations and Aboriginal communities came to know and understand these lands. So it's fitting, I guess, that the conversation is happening tonight. Tomorrow is National Aboriginal Day. This is Aboriginal Week for the city of Calgary. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jessa. And also at 10:24 tonight, it's summer solstice. And with that, with solstice, we are reminded of how precious each day is. I mean, right now we are actually going to have diminishing sunlight hours and more nighttime hours. And so it's wonderful that we could get together tonight with you and a wonderful group of panelists who I'm going to briefly introduce to you. Those include Wilton Goodstriker, from the Knowledge Keeper from the Kainai First Nation, Lorna Crowshoe of the City of Calgary, Fraser McLeod of Stantec, Troy Patenaude of Fort Calgary, and Teneya from, I got it wrong. Teneya, thank you, Teneya, Gwin, beautiful dress, from the Calgary Public Library. So each speaker will have about 15 minutes to interpret our theme for this evening. And then when they're all finished, we're going to have a quick question and answer period. So I invite you to stay for that. But right now, it's my pleasure to welcome Councillor Drew Farrell, the ever passionate and tenacious Drew Farrell, to bring welcoming remarks from the City of Calgary. Over to Drew.
Good evening, and thank you for coming out on such a beautiful day to hear about the history of East Village. And I'm really pleased to share this evening with you on this place called Mohinstis, the Elbow, the confluence of two rivers where people have lived for thousands of years. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Blackfoot people, Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, and within the boundaries of Treaty 7. I would also like to acknowledge the ancestors of this land from the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nations. Welcome. Tonight, the Placemakers East Village speaker series will explore the history of this place, Mohinstis. Did I say that right? Sort of, maybe. And how fundamental our shared history is to the vitality of our spaces and our public spaces. So several years ago, when CMLC was just starting out in East Village, there was a discovery of a perfect stone circle just down the street from us, where the old Safeway site was. And it was maybe as deep as this stage was, perfectly under the surface of an asphalt parking lot. So CMLC contacted the archaeologists from the University of Calgary. They cataloged and numbered and recorded this perfect stone circle. The area redevelopment plan talks about the history of East Village, and we were just doing a new area redevelopment plan, and we wanted to put in some images of the historical sites in East Village. And the area redevelopment plan talks a lot about commemorating, celebrating our history. But it was the Louis and the Eddie and the Simmons building, and I suggested, we have some pictures of this perfect stone circle. And there may be some other sites that we have photographs of from the Glenbow that we can include in our area redevelopment plan to show our shared history. And so when Susan and I had a meeting, we meet regularly about once a month, I mentioned this to Susan, that you know what, East Village, we kind of think about it as a new community, kind of new old community, 150 years old. It used to be a red light district, interestingly enough. If you look at an old map from the Glenbow, it actually says red light district. But we started talking about the opportunity of our shared history. So I introduced Susan to Lorna Crowshoe. And I tell you, when you bring two dynamic women, well, and I sort of sat and just listened, who have ideas and creativity. When you bring them together, magic happens. And when you look at the history that we think of, is just the Eddie and the Louie, and then you add thousands of years of shared history, now it gets interesting. So that's what I love about CMLC. You present an idea and magic happens. And we don't have to go through a lot of red tape to do it, right? So we're going to talk about that shared history when we talk about East Village, and we have art and we have commemoration. We will talk about those thousands of years of history. So there's a quote, "Know the past to understand the present and plan for the future." While this statement holds great value, and especially in this particular context, we often speak of Indigenous peoples as if they were only peoples of the past. But Indigenous activists, and especially young Indigenous activists, are calling for a change of attitude in treating the communities as they are for today and for tomorrow. So in placemaking, one of the tenets is that the community is the expert. And I'm proud to say that the City of Calgary has taken a great step in the process of reconciliation at the confluence of our two rivers. But we have a long way to go. So I challenge us tonight to know and understand our shared history and continue to create great public spaces together. Thank you. Have a good night.
I was remiss, I did not introduce to you all my colleagues at CMLC, and they're sprinkled among you. And Michael Brown, our president and CEO, is at the back, so we're going to probably call him up later and ask him some hard questions. Oh, I won't, okay. Let's get started. Okay, I would like to introduce our first speaker. That is Wilton Goodstriker of the Kainai First Nation Traditional Knowledge Keeper, Blackfoot Confederacy. Wilton Goodstriker is a well-known Blackfoot Traditional Knowledge Keeper of the Kainai First Nation. Wilton worked for many years in the field of corrections and served on numerous boards, committees, and judicial processes involving Indigenous peoples and the justice system. As a renowned cultural leader, Wilton is dedicated to the preservation of traditional practices, spiritual beliefs, and the Blackfoot way of life. He, along with a group of Treaty 7 First Nation traditional knowledge keepers, were influential in supporting the City of Calgary in development of the Indigenous policy framework by sharing knowledge, ideas, and advice. Wilton will be speaking about our ancestral footprint at the confluence at the Bow and Elbow Rivers. Please welcome Wilton.
Okay, Tani Dapi, Kitokanax Matsum, Xixikuika, Chikutaxi, the Ginito Tatiopi. Hoganito Tatio, Nakanistona Suka, no Xixikuik. In English, hello. Welcome to our traditional territory. This place brings back a lot of interesting memories. I was the first Aboriginal police officer here in Calgary, and some interesting happenings here in this particular hotel. In fact, I have to share a story. When I first joined the police force, people used to phone into the police station complaining that there's an Indian driving around in a police car. He's got a uniform and he's got a gun. It took the city a while to get used to that picture, that we could actually become meaningful partners in society. And I think of late, we've been sitting by the wayside for many, many years, but in the last few years, I think people are beginning to call on us to assist in whatever way we can to help in development, to help in education, whatever the task is in front of us. I come from an old culture. The necklace that I'm wearing is what we call the buffalo stone, in our language, Iniskim. Scientists have tried to date this particular stone using their carbon dating, whatever else they use. The closest they could come to a date is an estimated guess somewhere between 65 to 70 million years. And it has a song, it has a story. So we do come from a very, very old culture, and in our traditional teachings, the old people teach us that there is a sacred kinship between all things, the universe, all of life, Mother Earth. Some of you take the opportunity to visit Indian Village or during the Stampede, you'll notice some of the teepee designs. The teepee design itself acknowledges that sacred kinship that exists among our traditional people. The top part of the teepee acknowledges the universe, Creator's world. The middle part of the teepee is life. We share that with the four-leggeds, the ones that fly, the ones that live in the water, the ones that live in the ground. The things that grow, all of life, we're a small part of that. And the bottom part of the teepee represents Mother Earth. So every time we ask the elders to pray or participate in ceremonies, they always have to acknowledge that kinship. From that understanding comes in the world of academia, the epistemology of my people, the worldview of our people comes from that sacred understanding. Some of you have seen the sweetgrass that we use, braid of sweetgrass, always at the beginning of every ceremony that we do. That too acknowledges this sacred kinship, always made with 3 strands, never more than that, 3, representing the universe, the life, Mother Earth. In terms of development in our community, we again have to acknowledge that we have ceremonies that honor the universe, we have ceremonies that honor life, and we have ceremonies that honor Mother Earth. In fact, there's a ceremony that involves removing a rock from here and putting it over here, making it change places. A tremendous sacred ceremony. I cringe every time I see a backhoe digging a big hole I took part in that particular ceremony, and it cost me 7 head of horses, monetary value perhaps about $10,000 in terms of giveaway in order to participate in that particular ceremony. So that's the kind of respect that we do have. Our traditional territory stretches from what is now known as Edmonton, the North Saskatchewan River, and you go south into Wyoming, the southern boundary of our traditional territory. On the west side, we have the Rocky Mountains, and on the east side, we have the territory stretching from about where North Battleford is all the way down to the Moose Mountain Hills in southern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and onward south. In 1877, we sat down with the government officials, and as a result of Treaty Number 7, we ceded that whole territory, and we were placed in small reservations. In exchange for the ceded territory, we get $5 a year in treaty money. I'm saving mine to buy a suit, and I figure I'm about halfway. I got about 20 years to go to buy the suit that I would like. Anyway, this particular area, in this whole territory, water is an important part of our traditional ways. We honor water, and wherever there is a confluence of rivers, two forces coming together to make a stronger one, to make a stronger unit, is a sacred place. We bring our young there, we bring sickly people, we bring the elders there, so they could wade in the sacred healing powers of the confluence of rivers, a powerful place. Before this part of Calgary was developed, you could walk around this whole area and find thousands of teepee rings, thousands of medicine wheels. There's buffalo pounds that surround this whole area. Some of them you can still find in Paskapoo slopes up around Nose Hill. There's some in there, always along the river. We didn't use the jumps. Jumps were actually frowned upon because there are certain societies that are not allowed to eat bruised meat. So preferably we prefer to take the animals down one by one, or to use a pound, where the injured ones are the ones we take and let the rest go. Anybody who does some fishing will tell you that where the confluence is perhaps the best fishing grounds that you'll ever see. In this particular area, many medicines are found. Last year, we took a little walk along with Troy and some of the people. Lorna, I think, was with the group. And we showed them some of the medicines that still live along the river, powerful places. This part of Calgary was perhaps the main campsite in our traditional territories for purposes of trade. It was traditionally a trading spot, a place where we come together in ceremony, considered a no-fly zone. As long as you were here for ceremony, participating in trade, nobody would harm you. But once you leave the area, then you got to keep your eyes open, hang on to your horses. But this place was considered a no-fly zone. When contact was arrived, traders, the British trading companies, the American trading companies chose the traditional trading spots and built their trading posts. The Northwest Mounted Police, when they came out, asked if they could build their forts, one in Fort McLeod, one in Fort Calgary here, was just around the corner. They too realized that this was a special place to the people, and people would come gather here. Although our people didn't write in terms of documenting our heritage, our history, a huge cultural footprint was left in terms of petroglyphs, some of you, if you take the opportunity to visit places like Chief Mountain, a place where thunder comes from. Some of our sacred societies came from that particular area, writing on stone. Dinosaur Provincial Park, Majorville Medicine Wheel. That medicine wheel is close to 10,000 years old. We have another medicine wheel at the south end of our territory, and that one is dated some 20,000 years. So we're an old people, and when I was going to school here in Calgary, I went to high school here in Calgary. First of all, I spent 10 years in the residential school at home. Some of you have heard about the residential school experience. That's why we're all part of the era of reconciliation now, the efforts to say, I'm sorry, let's work together. And so it's a real pleasure to be part of that. Anyway, when I left residential school, my parents decided to send me here to Calgary. I went to St. Mary's High School. And when I first got there, I noticed they were having trials for the track team, the high school track team. I asked them, is there a chance that I could be a part of the track team? And they said, no, we're full, sorry. And what I did was I entered as an independent, representing my old school, and set a track record at the city meet. It still stands. Monday morning when I went to school, I was given a locker, a brand new track suit, new track shoes, and I said, I thought you were full. And no, for you, we got all kinds of room. We need your speed. And so anyway, welcome again to our traditional territory, and I'm going to turn the mic over to some of the other folks that are on the panel to share with you some of the really, really interesting work that Calgary is beginning to do in terms of working with the Indigenous people, working with First Nations, and developing a paper, a policy paper, which is a front runner in North America. Nobody has ever done the beautiful work that these people have put together. And I'm really, really glad to be a part of that. And I commend the city of Calgary for taking a big step. In order to take steps like that, sometimes we have to think outside the box. Sometimes we have to get out of the box in order to do that. And society sometimes it puts us in a pretty tight box. But my world lives outside the box. And again, welcome to the confluence of the Bow and the Elbow River, a powerful place. And they've done some really, really beautiful work. The old St. Louis looks real good all dressed up. Thank you very much.
So I read some stories, Wilton, about things that happened in the basement of this hotel, and I bet you could tell me if they were true or not. Okay, so we have two speakers, our co-speakers now, are Lorna Crowshoe and Fraser McLeod. And I'm going to introduce Lorna. And really, before I do that, Lorna, I want to say thank you, because Lorna worked with our team here at CMLC to pull this whole thing together. So a big thank you to Lorna. But Lorna Crowshoe, Indigenous Portfolio Issue Strategist with the City of Calgary. Lorna Crowshoe is a Piikani First Nations member from southern Alberta and maintains her strong ancestral and cultural ties to the Blackfoot community community. She is an issue strategist for the Indigenous portfolio of the City of Calgary and provides advice on Indigenous subject matter across the entire corporation. She provided leadership to 2 City of Calgary reports, those being the White Goose Flying, a TRC response, and the Indigenous Policy Framework. Lorna will be speaking about the City of Calgary's Indigenous Policy Framework. Second, and joining her is Fraser McLeod, community planner with Stantec. Fraser McLeod is a community planner here in Calgary with Stantec Consulting Limited. The focus of his work includes policy planning, community engagement, and land use planning. Recently, he supported the city in the design and development of the Indigenous Policy Framework. Prior to joining Stantec in 2012 to 2014, Fraser was a graduate student researcher with the Planning of Indigenous Peoples Research Group at the Queen's University. Fraser is going to talk about urban planning with Indigenous communities. Please welcome Lorna and Fraser to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you. Shortcut.
Perfect. Well, thanks for being here tonight. A bit of a spoiler alert or clarification. Lorna and I, because of the magnitude of the Indigenous Policy Framework, we're going to be talking to it together and give you a real sense about what's in that document and how it can benefit our city. So the title of our presentation is Acting on Our Shared History, because often when we think of reconciliation, we like to talk about it, but it's about time that we start acting on it. So in terms of tonight's discussion, we'll talk a little bit about the shared histories, then we'll give some background into the process, we'll allow you to understand sort of some of the core elements of the framework, and then we'll conclude by kind of pitching to you guys, although if you've already read it, you probably understand why this matters, but I feel like we need to reiterate specifically for planners, urban designers in the audience, why this framework is really important to our city.
So our whole policy framework is grounded in our shared history. And when I talk about our shared history, I talk a little bit about my experience at the City of Calgary as an employee. Probably within the first couple months, we went on a little field trip. And our field trip consisted of Inglewood, Ramsey, Victoria Park, the Beltline, and we landed up on Stevens Avenue Mall. Throughout that history of Calgary, not once was our Indigenous community mentioned and the history of our Indigenous community. And as an Indigenous person working for the city, it felt so, I guess I felt excluded within that history. And we've come a long way in really trying to present that knowledge to the City of Calgary. And, I want to just continue to express what Wilton has said, that we have such a rich history at this place that we must continue to work towards sharing that history because it makes Calgary so unique. We have to start, there's a starting point, and our starting point is through our Indigenous policy and working with the municipality in understanding that history from a different perspective, so thinking outside the box. At the confluence of the bow, we have our traditional stories. Our traditional stories, like Wilton said, requires transmission of knowledge. And we know we are we come from an oral knowledge perspective. And so when we're working with our traditional knowledge keepers, we have to understand how that oral knowledge system works. And that oral knowledge is really unique in a sense that this is about memory and about repetition of memory and transferring that memory to a historical piece. In Calgary, we know one of our oldest sites here is about 9,500 years old on Paskapoo Slopes, but because there's no human connection or human tool connection, we left it out of this particular piece. But this is working with our archaeologist, the same archaeologist that Drew Farrell talked about earlier. We also have a place that's 8,200 years old in Hawkwood. Some of you may be familiar with that. And then the Mount Royal site, actually in the Mount Royal district on 17th Avenue, is some buried history there. And then, of course, Paskapoo Slopes. The lower Paskapoo Slopes has a site that's about 2,500 years old. Some of the sites have been covered up through development. And then the Balzac site. So this is the beginning of the Niitsitapi history. The presence of the Nakota people in the traditional territory is about 500 years old. And then the presence of the Tsuut'ina Nation is about 300 years old. All pre-treaty, the presence of the Métis Nation came around the time of the treaty. The treaty, of course, is 1877, and we're beginning to hopefully share that history, and I know Troy will probably talk a little bit more about that history. But our non-Indigenous history really started post-1877. So our starting place, again, with our traditional Indigenous policy is about shared history and our relationship to the land. Some people think that that history is far away, it's thousands of years away, but no, we actually are practitioners of our tradition, our culture, our language, our spirituality. That's what sustains us. So it's present, it's not our history as current practitioners. This history, I think we have to understand, is grounded in education and action. And the TRC really starts to present that in our call to action, that we should start understanding this history, because this history has implications for us. And it certainly has implications for the City of Calgary and the City of Calgary moving forward in planning and decision making.
Great. So that gives you a little bit of a background into the shared history, but we want to kind of get to the nitty-gritty parts of the actual process that came forward to develop this Indigenous policy framework. We can't really do justice to all those involved in the process in 3 slides, but know that there was a lot of hardworking individuals who really joined this process and said, yes, I've got a curiosity, and yes, I think this is the right thing to do. And because of that, the City of Calgary has this incredible document in front of them. So in terms of background and process, this idea of the stars are aligning, this was a saying that Lorna always used to say to me when we would have our early coffee chats about the framework and where we wanted it to go, and deep conversations about, what could this document be about? And it was the idea that, there was a perfect storm forming, or a nice landscape forming, in terms of some policy precedents to drive this forward. We had COWAC's 10-year strategic plan. So for those of you who are wondering what that acronym is, I know as a planner we use acronyms all the time, so I feel like I should spell that one out for you guys. So it's Calgary Aboriginal Urban Affairs Committee. They recently changed their terms of reference, and then with that came out with a 10-year strategic plan that really took them out of the programs and service conversation and into a systems approach, where they're thinking at the high level, how can they advise and help the city out to really be good in terms of building relationships and stewards of the land. Now, the Mayor's Proclamation of Reconciliation, that also came forward in 2014. And lastly, on the national scale, we had the release of the TRC, which COWAC then produced the White Goose Flying Report as a response from a municipal level. So that in itself is sort of flowing through the city, and then you also have the framework sort of sitting above everything and helping to shape the city. So really this process, there's one word that summarizes it perfectly, and it was a collaborative process. So by April 1st, 2015, Council directed administration, Lorna Crowshoe, to support and others to support COWAC in developing the Indigenous policy framework. And then about a month later, the city and COWAC partnered with Stantec to kind of move this process forward. And we were there really just to provide extra support and really help this process along. So the first phase was grounded in a series of engagements with traditional knowledge keepers from all Treaty 7 First Nations, as well as urban Indigenous leaders, COWAC, and city staff from 16 business units. One of the first engagements we did was we set up small focus groups with city staff, and we talked to them. And we said, what's the what are your aspirations for this document, and also what's the current state in terms of how things are happening within your business unit. So we got a good sense about what could be in this policy framework. And lastly, the second part of this was an iterative policy drafting process, grounded in trust, respect, and accountability. And the reason I stress, trust, respect, and accountability, because it was not only trust and respect and accountability between Lorna and I, but we had to be accountable to everyone else in the process. So we really tried to design this process to work for everyone and to really be respectful of the knowledge that was shared with us. So here's a few photos that Lorna can run through in terms of who was involved in this process.
We could not move forward with this work if we didn't have the blessings of City Council. And so City Council really plays and will continue to play an important role in this policy work. We report to City Council every year. And so we report on the progress of our work. In the center of this slide, you will see Marie Wilson, one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners. And it was really important to have her present at the time when we were starting to initiate the policy work. The policy work is it's huge. I think Wilton said the first in North America. Well, it's the first in, we know, with municipalities across the nation. And we're so proud of it. We could not do this work without the presence of our traditional knowledge keepers. They continue to guide us through these processes, and we continue to engage with them at all points moving forward. City staff are also important. I have many city staff in the audience today, and I call upon them as colleagues and my colleagues in part of this work. So I wanted to acknowledge that.
Great. So now we'll just quickly jump into give you a sense for those of you who are still looking at the policy document, maybe curious about it, really what's inside that document and how the city can benefit from it. So I'll leave this to Lorna to kind of give you a sense of what it is and maybe what it's not.
So we're 2 months, not even 2 months out of the policy being approved by council. This policy, we're calling it a living document because the policy will continue to evolve and grow and change over time. And I think that's what is so special about it. We needed a starting place, and this was our best effort at a starting place. The other big, I think, undertaking is a cultural shift within the city. Most municipalities continue to think and only see our Indigenous community through the lens of vulnerable populations. So we're continued to be defined and identified as vulnerable populations, and a population that needs programs and services. And while there's nothing wrong with that, we also want our Indigenous populations to be seen as people who have this special knowledge and this special intellect and these assets that we bring to the table that we contribute and to be contributors of that information. So we're beginning to shift the paradigm so that the city can think of Indigenous people of something more than just vulnerable populations. We also have adopted a set of protocols that we continue to use with our traditional knowledge keepers. So the city's learning how to use those protocols, and I really admire our city staff who continue to call and say, well, what can we do? Why do we need tobacco? Why do we need an honorarium? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? And those questions are all really important because that's part of our cultural shift. And, you know, like I said, this document is a living document, and we continue to move forward with this living document.
So as for the purpose of the framework, it's really threefold. It's really to guide council on how best to listen to, learn from, and act on ways forward together with Indigenous communities in planning, advising, and decision making. You can even see the language in that purpose statement. It takes it out of the needs-based box and really is that enabling, inclusive policy that's really focusing on that systems approach and having communities define on their own terms what that process should look like. It's also about strengthening council and administration's understandings, relationships, and opportunities. And again, the idea is that the city staff have that curiosity, but they really need to build on their own understandings and the collective understanding of the city by working with the right Indigenous communities, whether that's Treaty 7 First Nations, the Métis Nation, or other urban Indigenous community members. And this specific policy is tied to matters of historical, traditional, and cultural significance. So that would be, a policy or a purpose statement specifically for planning, parks, those types of departments. And lastly, it's about strengthening council and administration's understanding relationships and opportunities on matters of contemporary significance. So with regards to the city, this could be recreation, affordable housing, all sorts of public art. You were talking about that one earlier today. So it's really the threefold purpose of the policy statement really covers all areas, but it's not prescriptive. And that's one of the benefits of the policy framework, is that it kind of sets in place a platform for the city to build other initiatives, strategies, and protocols from. So in terms of the structure of the Indigenous Policy Framework, I realize there's a lot of words up there, hard to read, that's okay. I'll explain it from a distance for you, just about how the document structures. So the first part, knowledge, is really about, it follows that idea of reconciliation. We need to acknowledge what has happened and also acknowledge the knowledge that exists within our community. Whereas recognition is really about identifying for city staff where this policy aligns to higher policies and where it anchors within the city, or could anchor within the city for different departments. And then the third part, CAOC's proposed policies, are those policy statements that are broken down into 4 ways forward, which we'll talk to you soon. And lastly, because this is a document about opportunity, a document about taking risks, and a document about new ideas, the last section is really filled with stories from city staff and other community members, just speaking to the potential of this, and also some of the efforts already underway at the city. So today we're only going to focus on just the policy. So it's divided into 4 areas: ways of knowing, ways of engaging, ways of building relationships, and ways towards equitable environments. So I'll hand it over to Lorna to quickly cover ways of knowing.
So ways of knowing is about understanding the history and understanding it within the context of shared history. So Wilton came up and provided us with some history. That's what we need to understand. If there is a gap in that history, then we're not doing due diligence to planning and decision making. So that history piece, it's the education piece that comes before the actual action of planning and decision making. It's a critical part of this whole policy piece. Ways of engaging. The ultimate outcome of engaging is to build relationships. And I can't speak to how important that is for our work at the city. So if we didn't have a relationship with mayor and council, for example, if we didn't have a relationship with our partners, and more importantly, if we didn't have a relationship with our Indigenous knowledge keepers, then this policy would be almost impossible to implement. We need collectively to move forward on this activity. So engagement is really important. And I want to just make a little note on the engagement piece. We also work over here on the periphery with the First Nations duty to consult. And so we know that consultation is legislated by the province through the federal government. So this is a piece of work that enhances consultation, or it's a standalone with just a desired piece that the city wants to work on.
Great. So when you have that base understanding built up, and you're starting to engage more and more on a regular project basis, there's the opportunity for the City of Calgary to really focus on ways of building relationships. So this policy section in itself is really about guiding the city towards leadership to leadership relationships. We intentionally use the word leadership to leadership because we thought whether you're a junior staff member on the planning team or you're senior administration, everyone has a role to play in building relationships of mutual trust and respect and accountability with Indigenous community members. And lastly, when the relationships are there and the ties are there between Indigenous communities and the city has an opportunity to look inwards and figure out, well, what works at the city for specific communities, and maybe what doesn't work, and how can we provide strategic amendments led by community members on their own terms to those policies to make a more inclusive city. So in terms of why the Indigenous policy framework matters, to wrap it up, Lorna?
Again, this is our shared history. So what I tell my colleagues at the city or my colleagues out in the community is this is our history. If you're a resident of Mohkintstis, if you're a resident of Treaty 7, this is your history too now. And I think there's a certain component of accountability, responsibility, stewardship to this shared history. And if we can begin to frame it within that context, then there's some ownership on all of us. And it's our foundation and it's our starting place. We like to say that with this shared place, or shared knowledge, that we can begin to develop equitable relationships. It's not about those Indigenous people over there and us over here. It's about collectively coming together to make room for those equitable partnerships to happen, and recognizing that we all benefit from the presence of our I call them our subject matter experts from our traditional territory, and to keep those traditional knowledge keepers in our new way of working. It's really important to use their expertise and knowledge. And it helps to create something pretty significant. I think two things have come out of the City of Calgary in the last little while. One is raising the Treaty 7 flag permanently. I think you've all heard that on the news. And the other is renaming the Langevin Bridge to Reconciliation Bridge.
Great. So really, to wrap it up fairly quickly, see a couple points on the screen, we'll get through them. But the idea is this framework matters because cities exist on traditional and often treaty territories. The reason I put often treaty territories is because if we take into consideration Ontario context in certain communities, as well as BC, there isn't always a treaty. So it's really important to know the territory you're in, know the traditional territory you're in, and also learn about the treaty of the community that you're part of. And the land is really resonating with the ancestral and cultural footprints of Indigenous people. The city, through this process, worked with a really interesting and phenomenal group and knowledgeable group of traditional knowledge keepers from Treaty 7. There's more opportunities to have them on board with different processes at the city. And really, it's about actively informing the city. And it's, creating a more informed practice and city does require cultural shifts and an emphasis on relationship building, which is one of the main sort of core concepts of this framework. And really the framework, on a different level, it really challenges us as citizens, as individuals to really, and even as practitioners, to rethink, planning ideas, processes, or terms. And not even planning terms, just terms we use around the office, and really to start to think about how we can do things more inclusively and equitably. And lastly, I always like to talk about reconciliation because I think there's always a misconception when we talk about it, because we talk about it as if it's some sort of destination we're trying to get to. But reconciliation is not, it's not a race. It's a slow-moving process, but it needs to be active and sustained. And it really needs to be focused on deconstructing and unlearning some of our colonial assumptions, our biases, and our practices. And sometimes those can be a bit unconscious, and we might not fully realize, how we approach or how we do things. But if we start thinking about that, and I know as a planner, if we start becoming more of a reflective practitioner, it can lead to better outcomes for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So for this, I always see the role of a planner is not really a subject expert, because subject matter expertise really resides in communities, and Indigenous communities specifically. So what's the role of a planner? Well, it's really to be a facilitator, an active listener, and an advocate, and a partner in the process. Or as we learned yesterday at the Canadian Institute of Planners, it's not so much about being an ally, but it's about being an accomplice.
Right.
So I kind of see myself as Lorna's accomplice with regards to this project, and I think it's something really special for the City of Calgary because it gives us a place-based model to go forward together. How the city figures that out is really dependent on their relations and their opportunities with Indigenous communities. But what this document does is it puts us on a good path forward together, and hopefully through working together we can really start to create a city grounded in the traditional territory. So thank you.
And maybe just one final comment on when Wilton took us down the confluence of the Elbow about a year ago. And I recall him saying, this place is like a pharmacy because of the traditional medicines, the spiritual plants, and also because there is there's a creation story in that area. And sometimes we think of our history again as something that's happening over here a long time ago, but as we're current practitioners, that kind of information is what sustains us as Indigenous people. If we continue to practice our culture, our language, our spirituality, our traditions, if we weren't able to do that, we would be mainstream people. So I wanted to conclude with that. Thank you.
Lorna and Fraser, thank you for your work. I didn't really have a sense, I have to admit, of the depth and breadth and extent of time put into the policy. And we're probably going to have lots of questions. I should remind everybody that our panelists will, be up here. We have 2 more panelists, and then we're going to be taking questions. But I loved, Fraser, when you said that subject matter expertise lives at the community level. I love that. I think I might have to use that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. Troy Patenaude. Troy is the Manager of Special Events and Visitor Experiences at Fort Calgary. So Dr. Patenaude is from mixed Métis ancestry and has been a manager at the Fort Calgary since 2015. He is an art historian, a storyteller, and an educator who has been facilitating cultural and nature-based programs throughout Western Canada. He is also a sessional instructor at the Alberta College of Art, a certified hiking guide, and co-owner of Cross River Wilderness Centre in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Wow. Troy's topic today is Indigenous programming at a national historical site. So let's hear from Troy.
Thanks so much, everybody. Those were really incredible words and talks, and I had a bunch of things kind of planned out, and then so much came to me listening to them speak that I'm going to try and just sort of run with that within the context of Fort Calgary. So I kind of don't know what's going to happen here, everybody. But the first thing that came to me, who here has ever been charged by a bear? How many people here have been charged by a bear? 1, 2, 3. What happened when you were charged by a bear?
Bluff charge. There was 2 cubs in a tree.
Does everybody know? Did everyone hear that? She said bluff charge. What is a bluff charge?
They're just letting you know that you're too close, a little bit too close.
Okay, what happened when you were charged by a bear?
Well, my dad started a cappuccino spot and he ran away.
So the bear was scared pretty easy. Okay, and what about you?
So the sow received the cubs, and she reared up and looked at me, and I hollered, and then she turned around and came back.
And when you hollered, did she do anything?
She was, because her eyesight isn't very good,
Okay.
so she was trying to figure me out.
Yeah. I've been charged by a bear many times. And I'll tell you, kind of like people, just like people, all bears are different. And we make a mistake by thinking all bears are the same. And we listen to our scientists and our biologists tell us, when you see a bear, do this, and there's like a program to follow. And that's what you do. And I spend so much time out there in the mountains that I do a lot of running into bears. So I had this in this program in my mind the whole time. Okay, well, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And I didn't have to get charged or have too many bear encounters before realizing that like I'd say 75 to maybe even 90% of the time, the program doesn't work. All bears are different. So sometimes when bears charge you, like what happened over here, they run up and they kind of do it like this, and they stand in front of you and they do this, right? And so sometimes when humans go to a party, they're like, you know, everybody at a party is really different, right? And so there's the real aggressive person that you'll be, you accidentally brush him or her in the doorway and they turn around and get really aggressive really quickly. It doesn't take much to set them off. Some bears, you know, they'll see you suddenly and they kind of go up on their hind legs and they'll kind of sniff in the air and they might kind of do this. They go like this and they kind of run back and they kind of sniff again and they kind of look around and then they might go away. They're kind of curious to know what's going on, but they're the kind of the humans at the party that, you know, they don't really, you know, they're a little uncomfortable around people and that big kind of a crowd of people. So they're kind of put on caution, but they're not really aggressive, but cautious, not terrified either. And then of course you get the bears that kind of like the human at the party. This is like me at a party. I'm not too much of a people person, and I can stay in a corner with the same 2 or 3 people all night and just get lost in conversation, and I don't care about the people at all. And sometimes when you have a bear coming up, a bear might walk right up in front of you like this, or you might come around a tree and you suddenly, oh, there's a bear, and you're kind of startled, but the bear just keeps going, and you kind of wonder, oh, well, does it even know I'm there? You don't even know, and it just keeps going. So sometimes that happens. And then, of course, you get the bears that are terrified and run away. Why this is important is because it always comes down to this question. Everybody's so scared of bears. So what is the most important thing to remember when you have a bear encounter? Everybody says the most important thing to remember is don't run away, right? Everybody hears that. And actually, I'd have to agree with that. In my experience, that's always helped me. Even in the moments when I've been charged by a bear, not running away, however fast my heart is pounding or however many people, I'm a guide, so sometimes I have people with me, how many times they're taking pictures or how many times they're running away, because people are all different. You know, there's so many different things. So you don't run away, and that helps. And why am I telling you this? Because we are all right now being charged by our own history. We are being charged by our history. Sometimes the stories in our history are really terrified of us, and they want to turn and run. Sometimes stories in our own history are kind of cautious, and they really grab our attention, and so that's really interesting, and they kind of hold our attention for a while, but then we might forget it the next day. Some stories in our history are aggressive, and they want to punch us in the gut. They want to crack our hearts open. We feel it in our bones. We feel it in the cells of our body. And we want to run away from those. But what's the most important thing to do? No, you don't run away. Just like bears, you don't run away from our history. The tragedy in history, and the tragedy in all of this, happens when we run away from what our history is trying to tell us. That's when the tragedy happens. Some people think that the tragedy happens when history gets hard. That makes us want to run away. The tragedy is when we ignore everything our history is trying to tell us. So I want to propose something to you right now. Listening to the other talks, listening to Drew Farrell talk, you know, there's this talk of shared history, shared history, shared history. I want to propose that what we are in right now is not a shared history at all, it's a shared reality. If we listen to what Wilton and Lorna were saying, they constantly had to remind us, you know, this is not a history to us, this is the present. I want to propose to you and invite you into this story of history that we're all trying to run away from right now, that neither is it the past. We're all sitting in the present for non-Indigenous people too. Even the ugly stuff. And by talking about it in a historical kind of way, however nice we make it, and however many words we coat that in to make it sound nice that yes, things are changing and so this is good, it's still a colonial way of thinking. You know, it's a linear thing. We can say history and then try to convince ourselves that this is not just in the past, that you know, we're doing some work here now to change things. Sympathy and benevolence, we have to be vigilant of that. It's important sometimes, but in my experience, when I've spent so much time talking about history and culture with people, in my experience, sympathy can also be the new clothing of racism. On one hand, it allows us to say, yeah, we really, really care, we're doing a lot. And on the other hand, meanwhile, it gives us an excuse to not really do anything to help that which we care about. And I see that happening all around me all the time. So, working at a national historic site, I'm constantly trying to get the idea across to people that this is a shared reality that we're living in right now. That what in our colonial minds might be saying is history is influencing and shaping and directing everything we do, every thought, word, and action we do right now. We're in a shared reality. And so if our reality is not how we like it, we're not going to get away from it, we're not going to heal it, we're not going to overcome it, triumph over it by running away from it. So it's a shared reality that we're in. We can never, ever dismiss the fact and skirt around the fact that we are living in a shared reality here in this part of the world. So Lorna brought up the fact Treaty 7. That's been on my mind because I've been working on this Treaty 7 project at Fort Calgary now since November. Now, one of the most important things for us to remember is that here in this part of the world, why we are the way we are as a society and why we're all here is because of the promise of this treaty number 7 that was signed in 1877, but which was never fulfilled. We still have yet to fully experience what it's actually like to be fully enriched and become alive to this place and its potential and the benefits it gives us. We have no idea what it's really like to be in a real partnership, in a real alliance. And I know things are changing and it's much, much different than it was, say, 50, 60 years ago, but remember, we're living in a shared reality. There's no such thing really as the past. Where we are right now is where we are. And the problems, they have different clothing and they look different, but it's the same. I was really struck when Fraser said at the end, you know, they went through this the policy framework, the Indigenous policy framework that they've been working on, this amazing document, these amazing things. And then he says, so I don't know what the council's going to do with it, it's up to them. It's up to... In a way, yes, it's up to them, but can you see that that's also kind of the problem? At a national historic site, when you go to Fort Calgary, is a colonial institution. It's got entrenched racism and oppression built into it automatically. So unless those systems change, regardless of who the people in them can be incredibly kind-hearted. But if the system itself doesn't change, if we don't tap into our creativity and our courage and think outside the box, like Wilton said, then our national historic sites are never really going to be fully capturing the potential of the place that is supposed to be capturing the history or the story of, and we're never really going to truly know what it means to come alive in this place, and when I say place, I don't just mean Calgary, I mean the more than human animate earth that fuels and shapes everything we do. So these systems, it seems in our minds that, the municipal government, these national historic sites, the structures that we think of as, our systems that we're used to working in, it seems in our minds that these are these large looming things and kind of have all the power. In a way, they do have all the power, but because of this treaty, these treaties that were signed, by Indigenous nations all across Canada, different treaties, and the Canadian government on behalf of the Crown, the Canadian government actually doesn't have authority. There's a difference between power and authority. And that's why when all of these issues come up in courts, when people are talking about history and culture, and it becomes real serious, that's why Indigenous communities always want to have the Governor General there as a representative of the Crown, because the Governor General has authority, not the Prime Minister of Canada or our governments. So all of these stories, including the ones that you go see on the walls in Fort Calgary, are these tiny, small, little bits of time nested in a much larger, deeper, huger, richer story that is continually, from the ground up, shaping and influencing everything we do. And all of these systems that we now know of are always being like chipped away at and eroded from the ground up. But because our systems, one of the incredible things with Eurocentrism and everything that we've inherited from Europe is it's incredibly arrogant, and it always thinks that it's right and it has the right answer. And the way that this story is told is the right way. The way this government works is it's got to be the right way. This education system we have is the right way, and it's very arrogant. And it doesn't see all of the incredible richness stuff coming up from the ground that wants to work with it, wants to change it, wants the story to actually be a partnership, but it's shut down. And so there's cracks, though, coming up, because when you think of the earth and where we are in this place that is a blessing to be in, when you think of how we are here right now, why we are the way we are, you can pave over that relationship. You can even forget about it as much as you want, but you will never, ever eradicate it. It's impossible. We need, outside the city, we need the rivers. We literally, quite literally, need the mountains. We need the sky. We need the winds, the rains, all these animals. We need all those bears to help teach us. And all of these cracks coming up through our systems, one of the most important things we can do, especially non-Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people, they have a question sort of looming over them. This is the charging of history coming full force at us right now. You have a choice to make. You can either, get out of the way of Indigenous peoples and stop the suffering, or, continue the suffering and keep getting in the way. So when I think of placemaking and these concepts that our Eurocentric minds like to think, it's not really about placemaking for me at all. It's about getting out of the way so that we can get to know the place that's already here. And how you do that is get it out of your mind that we have to make anything. It's not us, it's not a national historic site that is doing the making. We have to get out of the way and allow the place to come alive, and allow that to feed us and nourish us. And how you do that is you build relationships. So I brought this painting along here with me right now. This is something out of what you might call our history, but it's still very much with us today. One of the first, what are some of the first things that you notice in this painting? What does it jump? Is there something that jumps out at people when they look at this painting? The one cowboy? Yeah. For me, this is the way it always happens in the beginning. In the beginning, people, things meet and encounter each other, and there's a relationship. And there's people here who don't necessarily understand each other, that are trying to understand each other, trying to build a relationship. And the Métis person there, he's actually using sign language, trying to talk to the members of the Brave Dog Society. So relationship building is so important. And I know Lorna talked about relationship building as well too. And I want to talk a little bit about that because this is so key. This isn't a matter of this isn't a relationship like the kind of relationship of, okay, well, I'm going to write, this report for you, and then you get to decide on it. And maybe we'll consult, so you write this report for us, we'll consult with you a little bit on how this works, and then, but we're working together, right? Like, that's not really a partnership. It's kind of, it's a relationship for sure, but it doesn't grab the full richness of what that partnership could really be. And so at a National Historic Site, when I'm talking to people about, well, say the confluence of the two rivers, lots of people might ask me about, what the most important thing is that I could teach them, and really, there's not really anything I could teach them. There's nothing that is more important than, say, walking out there on the land with someone like Wilton. When I was walking down the river with Wilton a year ago, that's been brought up, there's nothing in the world that I could ever say in my knowledge that comes close to that. I mean, it's just impossible. It won't happen. I have a different kind of knowledge and a depth and a different kind of knowledge. But in order to really grasp the full richness and the true potential of having a place like Fort Calgary at the confluence of the two rivers at the center of our city, which gave rise to this city, to live and really breathe and be and have the full potential in our city of a place like that, there actually needs to be a true partnership happening. And there's so many barriers to things like that. And I don't even want to get into the barriers, but we're such a long way away, and people don't really know exactly the depth of what these partnerships and relationships can be. I think that might be all I have to say. There's one other thing. I don't know. I am totally not keeping track of time here, but the world deserves to live in a diverse way. The world deserves to live in a diverse way where all people's knowledge and stories and dreams can contribute to our collective well-being. But underneath the structures that we live in, whether it's our governments, our education, healthcare systems, our museum and art, cultural systems, heritage sites, under these systems, we can entrenched within them. It's not the people in them. I want to make that clear. It's not like we're doing, purposely. People don't purposely want to, hurt people. I know, but we just have to be vigilant. Like, this is deep. In these systems, the idea is entrenched that in order for one way of life to happen, it has to happen at the cost of another. It's like we experience a failure of imagination, that we can't imagine far enough ahead where in a place where there's people that we can live one way and they can live another way, and we truly enrich each other's lives on the edges. We're not even close to living that way yet. But there's resilience. If you look at an ecosystem again, go back to the land, not only our greatest pharmacy, but our greatest classroom. If you go out, I spend so much time out, say, in the Rocky Mountains. One of my favorite places are high subalpine meadows. And I don't know if anyone spends a lot of time up in these high subalpine meadows, but right before you cross that threshold from the trees into the meadow itself, I mean, the ecosystem completely changes. But all of a lot of the really, the berries, the real juice, a lot of the wildflowers, a lot of those things kind of grow along the edges where things can cross-pollinate and work together. Those are the real rich places. Those are the places of resilience within an ecosystem, is right there along the edges. A lot of the berries, they grow along the rivers, the river banks. It's on the edges of ecosystems. And it's the same within cultures for people. So it's those edges that enrich us. So I invite you to be vigilant in your own life, to look in your own life, look within your own communities, not be afraid of the history charging at you right now, because it's happening to us all. And we have a choice to make. We can have the courage and creativity to really, truly think of something new outside the box, or we can keep contributing to the suffering and this kind of muddy stuff. And yeah, I know governments and systems work slowly, but when lots of people are just kind of not knowing the truth, or even, sometimes just completely unconvinced, they work even slower when they work reluctantly. There's a lot of people still in all of our systems that are working reluctantly. They're working reluctantly and against the fact that we live in a shared reality. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, Troy. Our last presenter of the evening is Teneya Gwin. I hope I said it better that time. Is the Indigenous Service Lead at the Calgary Public Library. So she was hired as the first Indigenous Service Design Lead. This is a new role that was created in response to Calgary's Aboriginal Urban Affairs Committee report, The White Goose Flying, to focus on Indigenous engagement and programming for library members of all ages. Teneya's previous work has focused on Indigenous engagement and consultation for a variety of sectors and clients. She serves on a number of boards and is a Cree Métis from Treaty 6. Her topic today is Indigenous engagement and programming at a library, specifically the New Central Library. Welcome.
I maybe should have worn my heels so you could see me. Wow. I'm so honored to be here today. There's some really incredible people on this panel, and thank you for having me. There's some groundbreaking initiatives happening in Calgary. It's such an exciting time. So I'm Teneya Gwin, the Indigenous and Service Design Lead with the Calgary Public Library. I'll have images behind me, just flipping through the New Central Library right next door, and examples of Indigenous placemaking in Alberta and Canada. So the first few examples of placemaking are in Thunder Bay, but however, I wanted to focus on spaces in Alberta. And there's great examples, and I was fortunate enough to work on some of the projects engaging with elders and youth to create a shelter for a sweat lodge within city limits. So I'd like to start to acknowledge that I'm a visitor to Treaty 7. Both sides of my family are from Treaty 6. I'm 5th generation Métis from the McLeod Band, and my grandfather took script in Big Lake, Alberta. And I'm an Oilers fan. So Indigenous Services is new to the library system, and with my background of engagement and consultation, that's how we're approaching this role. So to be successful, and a lot of individuals spoke about this today, is we need to build these relationships and we need to have guidance and directions from our urban and rural Indigenous communities. The opportunity to build new relationships and open doors is very exciting, and we recognize we are embarking on this journey that is ongoing and is a long-term commitment. I'm working with our Library Foundation to explore how we can invite Calgarians and corporate Calgary to support these ambitions. At the Calgary Public Library, we're indigenizing all programming throughout the system, and this mandate is from the federal government, the TRC. And the TRC calls upon all libraries in Canada to bring education and awareness of residential schooling and the impacts it's had on our Indigenous people. So what does it mean to indigenize or decolonize? These are the definitions I've been working with at the library. So decolonization. It's about recognizing the reality of Canada's colonial history and how it's been subjected to our Indigenous people. It's also to recognize that present-day structures, governments, organizations, and institutions are built on a colonial perspective. And that is not included in Indigenous worldview, cultures, or traditions. Decolonization is about providing the space to support and include an Indigenous perspective. So indigenization is about incorporating and integrating Indigenous worldviews, traditional knowledge, and perspectives into the educational system and other organizations and institutions, recognizing that these are ways of knowing and doing which are equal to other ways of knowing. Both decolonization and indigenization require us to work together, and the mutual respect of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, government, organizations, and institutions. We hope to indigenize all existing programming from a holistic approach to limit segregations and silos within the library system. This is going to make an impact system-wide. That means the current 19 libraries and the 2 new community libraries currently in the planning stage. So imagine walking into a Calgary Public Library and hearing the beat of a drumming group, or the oral traditional stories from our local elders, or the book truck making trips out to our surrounding communities, providing resources and programming, and the visual representation of Indigenous culture reflected in our spaces. So part of my role at the library is creating spaces where Indigenous cultures and traditions are visual and practiced. I often ask Indigenous people if they can see themselves, their cultures, or their values reflected in the library. The answer is often no. Indigenous people have been omitted from our spaces for the last 150 years. It's a sad feeling to feel like you don't belong. And Indigenous people have felt invisible for a long time. So I feel a sense of pride when I walk into those spaces reflective of Indigenous culture. It brings identity to our spaces. And our visitors can feel the warmth of our culture. So this is one small part of what the TRC can do for our country, but this is also something the library can do. Become a brave space like no other organization in Calgary to reflect Indigenous heritage and history of the land. So what I envision through the library's placemaking process is honoring those 12,000 plus years of Indigenous history in Southern Alberta. To restore Indigenous presence in the fabric of Calgary's communities, we will support the TRC recommendations to engage communities in a co-design process. It will provide training and job opportunities for Indigenous youth, to create inspiring spaces, and to develop programming that joins Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians together in a setting of inspiration that mitigates polarizations and builds upon a common cause. Oh. So instead of Canada being known for its maple syrup and Tim Hortons, I think it would be beautiful that all people know the original people of this land and know that Canada is an Indigenous word. So Kanata, it means village. So thank you.
Everybody, please join me again in thanking all of our presenters. I can't speak. And we need everybody back on the stage. And Troy, okay, so we're going to open it up for some questions. Oops, well, people are dropping things, and Surrey is talking to us. Okay, so we're going to be joined here. Everybody's here. That's great. Any questions? Let's hear from the audience. Are there questions related to anything that you heard here tonight? If so, just Jack is here with a microphone, or you can just pop up out of the audience and ask your question, please. Because I can start. Okay.
Hey, I have.
Go ahead.
Hey, hello.
Go ahead.
Hello, I have a question sort of for Milton. You talked about the confluence of the river and the medicine. Is there a site in Calgary or around Calgary where the medicine game is played, or the creators game, formerly known as lacrosse? Is there a lacrosse site around Calgary? Just for my own curiosity. It's a little off topic, but it's a passion of mine. I've not found one. Maybe one of you know?
Lacrosse, is that what you said, Josh? Lacrosse.
No, I don't think so. Not to my knowledge. There are sites along the river where we used the horse culture games, warrior games. A lot of it testing skills as to throwing, shooting things. Those kind of games, but not to my knowledge. I don't think lacrosse was come from the East. And yeah, I think the Six Nations people, to some extent, the Ojibwe people did play some lacrosse. Further east is where the Huron, Iroquois, those were the professional lacrosse players.
Anybody else have any questions of our? Because if not, I'm going to start dropping some questions here. So maybe, Lorna, I'll start with you. So just what were some of the most challenging experiences while you were building the policy framework? And then conversely, when did you find yourself most inspired through the entire process?
I think the most challenging time I have had is when people are resistant to the knowledge. So we talk about knowledge building, and sometimes people are quite resistant to that knowledge, and they hang on to the knowledge that they know. And so when I talk about ethical spaces, when we are challenged, those ethical spaces don't occur. We don't make room for new information to flow. Mm-hmm. So that's about the most challenging. I think the most inspiring, and I really have to go back to leadership. And when you hear the mayor come out and say, welcome to these ancient lands and the traditional territory, that is really inspiring for me because it's quite catchy now. I think big institutions around Calgary are saying the same thing. I once told a colleague of mine that works at the city, every time the mayor acknowledges the traditional territory and the people of the territory, it makes me stand a little taller, a little prouder, and that, you know, somebody of that leadership caliber is acknowledging. And I see our Indigenous people in City Hall. And sometimes they are homeless, and sometimes they are present with their own issues. And of course, issues of historical trauma. if they can hear that, they would stand taller and prouder and know that they are also contributing members of our city.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's also an attitude that still exists, an attitude that sometimes says you don't belong. Racism is alive and well. On Nose Hill, we placed a beautiful medicine wheel. Some of you have taken the opportunity to hike up there and to take it in. It's a beautiful place. But every once in a while, we get people that deface and spread the rocks and again, coming from an attitude that you don't belong. You find that same attitude in different levels of the bureaucracy. Senior politicians, city council, very supportive of what's happening. People at Lorna's end also very supportive. In between, you'll find some of the naysayers, and that's been disappointing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you all so much for the contribution you each made to this evening. I've been moved by what you've had to say, so I thought I'd just take the opportunity to say something I'm struggling with and see if you have any guidance. On one hand, I feel the urgency, Troy, that I felt in your presentation, that things are so wrong and suffering is so deep. But then I also know we need relationship and process, and that bear has been coming at us for generations. So I struggle between those two poles, I guess, as it were, and I wonder if you could say anything on that dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important jobs we all have, I'm just answering the question from me. I'm speaking, they all might answer it differently, but one of the most important jobs I think we all have right now is to heal the unresolved issues of our ancestors. And I just think I go back to what Lorna was saying about these things that we think about, that we talk about as historical. There's a real responsibility that goes with those stories, our present day. And it's certainly not going to be easy. And we can't get lost in it either. We can't let ourselves get mired in it. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to feel a little bit outside of our comfort zone. I think if we feel a little bit outside of our comfort zone, we're collectively actually doing something right. That means we're not running away. So there are a lot of really, really good things that are happening, and I think we do have a lot to be thankful for. We have a lot to be thankful for here in Canada and in southern Alberta, and we also can never forget that what we have to be thankful for also came on the back of 150 years of oppression and cultural genocide. And not to say that we get mired in that again, but we're never really truly in a place where we can really appreciate and be really thankful for, I think, what we have right now, unless we always also know where we came from and why we're here and why we are the way we are. Yeah.
Anybody else want to add? Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Sure. Phenomenal answer. In terms of speaking from, I guess, a planning perspective, to planners in the audience, I think too often we plan, we focus on deadlines, we focus on timeframes, we focus on projects, but we don't actually spend enough time thinking about being a reflective practitioner, reflecting on our process, reflecting on the colonial nature of planning, and what are some of those issues. Often we go into communities, we say, we're going to do stakeholder engagement here. And the idea of a stakeholder fails to acknowledge inherent rights flowing from nation and of Indigenous communities. So the if you go in there with the intention of, well, here's a universal planning approach that I will apply to this community, and you're not even taking the time to just shut up and listen to the community and figure out what that process looks like, you're going into the process already with a set of assumptions. So whatever practice you're in, whatever field, whatever interest, it's really about reflecting as an individual, what are the biases that I bring to the table? What is the education that I've had or the experiences that I've had, and how is that shaping me as a person? And how can I go against the grain on some of those issues and some of those things that make me, maybe feel uncomfortable, and how can I do things differently? And in part, with planning, we always occupy this role as, well, you're a technical expert, you're this, but there's a side to planning, which I call planning from the heart, that there are softer skills to planning that we really need to focus on, because if we are to build relationships, if we are to take risks, if we are to, address the charging bear running at us, we need to really start thinking less with our head and more with our heart when it comes to this.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mike.
Wilton, it was serendipitous that you would mention the Majorville cairn on the eve of the summer solstice. I appreciated you doing that. I'm an annual visitor and a student of the site. Could you just mention the significance of that site to the peoples of this area, the native peoples of this area?
Okay, briefly, that particular site is I spoke earlier of the sacred kinship between life and the universe. That is one of the communication tools that we use to honor and speak to the universe. And when you begin to study the whole, it's not just the one site at Majorville. One has to hike the whole area, and it's a part of a huge map of activities that were happening at that time. It has 28 spokes representing 28 days of each moon. And in our traditional world, we have 13 moons. They're all exactly the same distance apart. Today, we all live according to the Julian calendar, which only has 12 moons, and we have to adjust some of the moons, giving one moon 20, 29 days, 30 days, 31 days, and every 4 years we have to take a day away to balance things out. Traditional moons were all exactly the same distance apart, 13 moons. And when you study the medicine wheel of Majorville, it tells you at a certain time, at a certain moon, here's what was happening, and it acknowledges Creator, Giver of life. This is what we did in your honor. Watch over my people. Yeah. So it's a beautiful place, and it's an old. I was in London a year ago. I had to take the opportunity to visit the Stonehenge, which is about 5,000 years old, according to the scientists, and beautiful place. We took some offerings over there, and every time we go to a place like the Stonehenge, like Majorville, other sacred places, the expectation is that you leave an offering to the Giver of life and continue to watch over our people and our loved ones, particularly our children. Yeah.
Okay, I think there's a question back here.
Yeah, I had a question. Teneya, when are you going to get a Flames jersey? No, I'm just kidding.
What did you say?
I just wanted to comment briefly on Troy's allusion there for the grizzly charge. We had, my name is Bill Snow, I'm with Stoney Nakota Nation. We did a traditional use study on grizzly bears in the Kananaskis region for Environment Canada that was completed in 2016. We tried to identify special places, especially for animals, within mountain habitats, giving Parks Canada a slightly different way to look at and manage areas for wildlife habitat. So this kind of struggle around looking at different ways of indigenization that is happening at a provincial level. It's also happening at the post-secondary level. University of Calgary and Mount Royal University are also in the throes of a indigenization effort. So gradually, I think those wheels are turning, and I think it's good to see the policy framework by the city. A lot of municipalities have not done that, and I think that's part of the work to do. But broadly speaking, I think that policy-making groups are kind of waking up to that indigenization effort. And it's certainly something that we cover in our report, some of the barriers to understanding Indigenous knowledge. A lot of it there is because of the government policy prohibited Indigenous knowledge, and we try to cover that in a limited way in our report. So just commenting that there's other processes going on. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's talk about programming a little bit. So, Teneya, you have a very difficult job because it's a new role. So you're forging ahead in a new role. Mm-hmm. You're integrating Indigenous programming into an existing structured library environment. So give us some idea, give us a little sneak peek under the tent, some of your ideas about what you want to introduce and how you're going to integrate.
Yeah, sure. It's actually not my ideas. It's me going out to community and seeing what is needed. Yeah. So I've been working with elders, and language is number one. So we're looking to host language courses at the library. Right now, we've already started the Creation Lodge in partnership with some of our community organization, which is host elders all over Alberta and Canada, and they tell the creation stories from we had Elder Reg Crowshoe, so the Blackfoot, and we had Tsuut'ina Nation and Jerry Saddleback, which is the Cree creation story. So it's just bringing it to a public space that's accessible for everyone. We also have a program coming up in September that we just received funding for. Woo! And it's called Igniting the Fire. So it's for our urban Indigenous population that has low income and over 18. So it's about storytelling in a variety of formats. So of course books, graphic novels, through song, and we learned how to build a drum, and we just bring culture back to our everyday, and the way Indigenous people learn is different than the way non-Indigenous people learn. So
just building on that, I just want to explore, given that East Village is at the confluence of the Bow and Elbow Rivers, and the new Central Library is, sort of central to the village story, is there something special that would or could take place at the new Central Library?
Well, yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Well, we're hoping to have a space dedicated for Indigenous people. Yeah. So it's going to be a focal point, and it's going to be inclusive. So it's our community that's going to be designing it, not our non-Indigenous communities. So it's going to be, I hope, fantastic and very inspiring. It's an inspiring space.
Troy, you mentioned new programs at the fort. Is there something you can tell us about? Specifics?
Well, I suppose, I'm not sure if the news has actually gotten out. I mean, this has been sort of bubbling underneath the surface now for years, but Fort Calgary is undergoing some massive renovations, and the entire museum is being gutted, redesigned from scratch, and rebuilt within the next year. Yeah. So, one of the reasons why I was, hired at Fort Calgary was to I think the board of directors was realizing that the way the story of Calgary and southern Alberta is told now on the walls of Fort Calgary is very one-sided, as though, you know, history here just began in 1875 when the Mounties arrived and gave rise to the city, right? And so when you go to Fort Calgary now, that's the story on the walls. And they saw that there was needing some cultural shift in things, and so I think that's partly why they hired me, and I established a committee of Indigenous consultants, and together the committee and I and the design team, most of which are in Vancouver, some here in Calgary, are redesigning all of the exhibits, you know, right from scratch with the input from. I've got a representative from each of the Treaty 7 nations and the Métis Nation on the committee, and then they've each gone out to their communities and they each have various knowledge keepers that they go back and consult with on various things as well for story gatherings and things like that. But so anyway, that's something that we're working on right now, is redesigning all of the Fort Calgary Museum exhibits to retell the story of Calgary and Fort Calgary in a much more respectful and real way, truthful way.
That's great. I got lots of questions. I can keep going. Anybody else have some questions? Okay, I'm going to work my way back. So Fraser, I mean, particularly the CMLC team, I mean, we are a group of placemakers. We're architects, we're engineers, we're marketers, and we're communicators. What about what advice would you give us as we look forward to planning, let's say, Victoria Park or the balance of the Rivers District? What wisdom would you depart on us as we start that work or undertake that work from a planning perspective?
Great. I don't think it's really wisdom from me per se, but it's more about the process you're going to go about. If you come in with the assumption, well, this is how it's going to happen, and this is our time frame, and this is what we're working with, and hopefully somehow we can put into place some Indigenous elements, I think that's the wrong approach. I think with regards to, you know, that redevelopment and other aspects of this area, there's a real opportunity to design processes where the relationships are the outcomes with Indigenous communities, and really to have processes defined by communities. So Treaty 7 First Nations, the opportunity to bring traditional knowledge keepers on board, to bring members and leaders from urban Indigenous communities on board, to really have them shape that process. I think too often we look at other design contexts and we look at ideas somewhere else, but there's something here, we're just not listening to it. Right. And I think designing that kind of process, similar to the framework, was really just the first half of the framework was just talking to people and getting a sense, but also talking to the right people. Right. So I think in terms of advice going forward, I think there's a real opportunity to talk to the people of the land, the traditional people, and there's a wealth of knowledge out there, and how it weaves into the process can really be defined by communities on their own terms. And as for the role of planners in this process, facilitators, active listeners, and less as the expert, because if you want an outcome, a design to really reflect the territory, I think planners kind of have to take a back seat, and communities really need to help drive that outcome.
Answer.
I think also what's important is for people who are interested in doing something like that is to reconnect with the land, reconnect with the place. Like Troy was saying, when he and I walked along the river, there's a real special connection that you feel just by being there. There's a group of planners making a making a journey to one of our ancient buffalo sites, and then the following day they're going to head smashed in buffalo jump on Monday morning, I believe that is, and I've been invited to be a part of that. So just having them there to to reconnect, to renew one with the land, reconciliation. That's all part of it, that we need to reconcile with the land and just find the spirit and the power of that place wherever we go. And that's why our grandfathers, grandmothers teach us whenever you go visiting somewhere, always bring tobacco with you, some kind of an offering, and where you go, ask for the spirit of that place to join you and to teach you what happened there and what took place at that particular site. And Majorville is a good example. When one goes there, when you go without tobacco, nothing happens. But when you place a little offering, that place begins to talk to you, and you get into the spirit of the whole place. And all of a sudden, there's renewal happening with the place. There's reconciliation, and you become one with the land.
Jack, sorry, Lachlan has a question.
Yeah, my name is Lachlan McKinnon. My great-grandfather was a pioneer rancher, and the section that he ranched included the Majorville medicine wheel. So I suspect there probably were some family cows or horses that knocked over some stones, and I'm feeling badly about that right now. But it is a powerful, powerful place, and the idea that there ever could have been any sort of ownership just seems like a laughable concept to me now. I'm wondering about placemaking here and the big project that we're talking a lot about in the city, the hockey rink, and if there has been consultation from an Indigenous perspective, or if there is room for something like that in a place that is as significant as this confluence that we've been talking about. If you have any comment on that, I'd be quite interested.
I think it'd be nice to consult at least with the Indigenous people, particularly where this place is going to be, and to again connect with that place and I can probably guarantee you the Flames will make it to the Stanley Cup.
Okay. I don't know how to come back from that one. I guess maybe my last question, unless there's no other questions, because I really, we were trying to keep everybody on track here. But Lorna, maybe the last question to you would be, for mom and pop Calgary, or for the average citizen of Calgary, what is it that you would want them to take away or live? What element of the policy, if there was one element, what is it that you would like us to know?
I think we are moving in a direction of, we have these phenomenal Indigenous sites here in Calgary. And whether they're individual sites or whether they're a cluster of sites, we need to acknowledge that and do our best to preserve, to protect, to monitor, or to learn the story about. And I think that's probably the accountability, the stewardship, to be good stewards of the land. And they're important pieces because, again, it's drawing out. When I work with our traditional knowledge keepers, when I hear their stories, and similar to what Wilton is saying, the land is vibrating and the land wants to speak, and we have to allow that activity to take place. If the land can't speak, then we continue to cover up this phenomenal history here. And, I challenge people, like having a conversation tonight in East Village. Drew Farrell talked about that 3,000-year-old, it's called a council lodge, and we know it's intact. So the question is, when are we going to dig that council lodge out of the archives and really do something about it? because that council lodge is part of that history. And learning about what that council lodge meant to the people of the traditional place is really important. I think we'll continue to learn about that. So those are the things I think that we challenge citizens about is we need to begin to investigate, research, and dig through the archives to see what comes to the surface.
Yeah, wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists tonight. We have a little takeaway gift for all of you. Thank you so much.